In this video segment, we're going to cover the conditions, the cutting conditions, and how to set them up correctly. Well, what is a cutting condition? Well, it's like a preset, and it's a preset that's set perfectly for a particular type of material. Now, each condition has settings that are important for cutting, like force, speed, quality, which is another word for acceleration, and then offset, which is basically your blade type. And then something we're going to discuss later in this segment is a mode that can be assigned to each condition and is specially designed for your thicker materials. And what's great about these conditions is that you just don't have one of them, but you have 8 conditions to assign to each type of material you're using. Which brings me to the other benefit, is that they're user definable. In other words, each condition, like I mentioned, can be set up for the different types of material or even the different types of cutting that you're doing, such as intricate cutting or maybe the more general cutting. These can be set up according to what your needs are. And once they're set up, they're switchable. In other words, as you put on a new piece of material or a different type of material, it's not a matter of going back and trying to set the force. You can actually just switch the condition, which is perfectly set for that material, and immediately start cutting, which saves you time. And what's great is all this can be controlled by software. What does that mean to you? It means that the lines in your design can actually control the different conditions. For instance, if you're cutting chipboard, you may have certain lines for cut lines and then other lines for your crease lines, which is a great benefit. Since now you don't have to switch between the heads, going to the plotter, switching the heads, changing the force. It's just a matter of allowing the software to control everything, which saves you time. Well, as you look on the LCD of the control panel, what are all those numbers that we see? Well, let's start off with this. This basically tells you that we're in condition 1, and as you recall, I told you that there were 8 conditions. So these can be switched between conditions, and I'll show you how to do that later. Next is the tool number. What this means is that condition 1 right now is assigned to tool 1. And if you look on your tool head of your flatbed, you'll see there's a 1 and a 2. So in this case, condition 1, like I mentioned, is set to tool 1. This is your force value. Now you may be thinking to yourself, why is there 2 force values? The first value is the force when it's cutting in the X direction. The second value is the force when you're cutting in the Y direction. Now why would we have 2 different force values for X and Y? Well, the reason is that certain materials can cut well in one direction, but not in the other. And we have found with our customers, if they only had one number for the force, that if they're cutting well in one direction, but not in the other, well, they increase the force. But that ruins the first cut, because now it's cutting directly into the bed because the force is too high. So what they've done is they've given you 2 values for X and Y, which is a great benefit to you. This value is your speed, which is obvious. When you change the values, they're always in centimeters. So you're looking at, when you see 30 there, you're looking at 30 centimeters per second. And the values go all the way up to 40. If you're into inches like I am, converting 40 centimeters would equal about 16 inches per second. Thus, if you set the value to 20 centimeters, you're looking at 8 inches per second. Just a little mathematics for you. The offset is the blade type. Now, why would they call it offset? Well, the reason is because each blade has a minor shift distance, or offset, that it has to travel in order to obtain sharp corners. They made it easy for you in that the only thing you have to do is put in your blade type by looking on the package and then dialing it into this value here. And then you're all set. You don't have to worry about what that distance is. The last value is quality, which is another word for acceleration. Now, some people get confused because they think, well, the higher the number, the better the quality. Well, no. If you think of it as acceleration, the higher the number, the faster acceleration, so your quality on your corners goes down. So just keep that in mind. The better quality or the thicker materials, you want to keep that number low. And then, of course, if you want to just kick in the speed, then bring it up a little bit more. And it does affect your overall speed. This is your status, and there's 3 levels of status. There's ready, which means it's ready to accept data. It's ready to go. There's online, which means it's receiving data and it's actually cutting it. And then there's pause, which means it can receive data, but it's just not cutting. When changing conditions, there's certain buttons that you're going to deal with. The first button is this condition button that you see there. You press that and it allows you to change the values of these conditions. The function keys then enable you to choose which value you'd like to set, whether it be force, speed, quality, or offset. The arrow keys then allow you to change those values. Now let's take a look at a video on how to change your conditions. The first button you want to press is the conditions key. And what this will do is open up, allowing you to change the values within the condition. When it first opens up, you'll see a blinking cursor right next to the force. So there's no button you have to press. All you have to do is hit the up or down arrow key to change the value. That's the X value. And then if you want to press the Y, you hit the side arrow keys to switch to the Y, and then use the up and down arrow keys to change that value. To change the speed, we press the F2 key. And of course, once again, we press the up or down arrow keys to change that value. We press the F4 key to change the quality, which is another word for acceleration. The last key is F3, which is for offset. Offset is basically your blade type. So basically what you want to do here is hit the side arrow keys until you see your blade type. Finally, just press enter to accept the values. Now that you've set up the condition, and the condition is set, test it. This is done by pressing the test button. Now the test button will give you 4 options, but we're only concerned ourselves with 2 of them, test 1 and test 2. Test 1 will cut 1 square and a triangle within it. Test 2 will cut 3 squares with 3 triangles within those squares. The first square and triangle is cut with force minus 1. Thus, if your force is 17, then this particular square and triangle is cut with the value of 16, or the force of 16. And then of course the middle one is force, and then the one after that's force plus 1. It just kind of gives you a better idea if you're not exactly sure where you stand as far as what the force is. When performing a test on thin material, this is what you look for. You basically look for the force, if the force is correct. And the way you do this is when you pull out the square, it should leave the triangle. So you see something like that. Now the other thing you look for are corners. Now this is true with thick materials as well. If the corners are rounded, that means the offset value is too low. If you get excessive offset, in other words, if you get little pointy little nibs on the corners, then that means your offset is too high. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what is the offset? That's the blade type. Well, if you recall on the little LCD screen, there is a value there right next to the blade type, right there. That's the value that you can change. Now as you recall, to change between the blades, or the blade types, you hit the side arrow keys. But for that value, you just hit the up and down arrow key. So, like I said, if you get the little nibs, decrease it, take it down to -1 to -5 till you get good clean corners. Of course, if you get rounded corners, then increase that value. Now, performing a test cut on thicker materials is not as difficult because it is a thicker material, so don't worry about leaving the triangle. But here's what you look for. If the square comes out and it takes out the triangle, then you're pretty much okay. But if it doesn't pull out easily, if you find yourself having to take a knife, or that you can see a little tearing going on, then go ahead and increase the force. Now the other thing too is that if you have a carrier sheet, if there is one, by applying a little pressure from the back, if it doesn't pop out, then you're good. But if it does, then that means your force is a little too high. And it also may mean that your blade is extended a little bit too far. So you might have to check those things out. So that's basically it for setting up your conditions and then testing them. Well, now that you know how to set up a condition by changing the different values within the condition, now what we want to do is set the other conditions. One condition for each media that you're using. The steps to set the conditions are: first, switch to the condition. Next, press the condition key. And the third, go ahead and change the values, which we've already covered. Now let's see how this works on the control panel. The first thing you have to look for is the status. Is it in ready? If it's not in ready, then you won't be able to switch between the conditions. Next thing you want to do is use your function keys to actually choose which condition there is. Now, I said there was 8 conditions, but yet there's only 4 function keys. How does this work? Well, by pressing the same function key repeatedly. This will toggle between the lower condition number and then the higher condition number. Let's see how this works. If I press F1 the first time, notice it'll change to condition 1. But if I press F1 a second time, it'll go ahead and change it to condition 5. And that's the way all the function keys are. If you notice this list, it'll show you what conditions each function key will toggle between. Now, one last note is the benefits of conditions. Take time to set the conditions. Don't be afraid to do this. The reason is because the benefits are outstanding. 8 conditions means freedom. First, it gives you consistent cutting. So every time you're switching between materials, it's not like you're trying to remember what the settings were to get the perfect cut. Those are already set. All you have to do is switch to that condition to get the perfect cutting. Secondly, this saves you time because you're not constantly adjusting the force or all the other settings for each material that you're putting on your table. These are just the benefits. Once again, don't be afraid to use your conditions. When switching between conditions, you'll often notice that the head switches back and forth. And that's just because it's going to the conditions that are assigned to either tool 1 or tool 2. And you'll see this when I press a different function key. As we're starting with condition 1, when I press F1 once, it goes to condition 5. If I press it again, it goes to condition 1. If I press F2 once, it goes to condition 2. If I press F2 again, it goes to condition 6. Same with F3, it'll go between 3 and 7. F4 will be condition 4, and then 8. So that's how you switch between the different conditions. It's pretty simple. As mentioned earlier, each condition is assigned to a tool, whether it be tool 1 or tool 2. Now, as a default from the factory, it's set up so that the first 4 conditions are set up to tool 1 or assigned to tool 1, and then 5 through 8 are assigned to tool 2. But it doesn't have to be this way. You can mix it up, so to speak. For instance, look at this pattern. Now you might think, well, this is crazy. Why do this? Well, some people do, and I'll show you why. For instance, here, condition 1 is assigned to tool 1, and condition 2 is assigned to tool 2. That's what I'm going to show you now, is how to assign a tool number to a condition. When looking at the condition, you can immediately see which tool it is assigned to. You'll notice the tool, and then you'll see the number right next to it, as we explained earlier. Now you want to change that tool number. To get to that menu, press pause, then next twice, then F2 for tool condition, F2 again for tool number. Turn on the condition. You press the side arrow keys till you get under the condition you'd like to turn on, and then you press the up or down arrow key to turn it on or off. And then you just press enter, and then pause again. If you're cutting thick materials, the thick mode is a function that's going to be used quite extensively. What happens when the cutting blade is coming up to a corner in a thick media? It tries to navigate around the corner. If it doesn't do anything else, what often happens, it'll chew up the corner. So that's what the thick mode function is all about. Watch this illustration as to how the blade travels when it reaches a corner. When it comes across and it gets to the corner, thick mode will lift it up, get it in the right direction, and then continue on. It's a great function for giving you nice sharp corners when you are cutting the thicker materials. The first thing you want to do is press pause. Then press next twice. And we're going to look at that tool condition. So I'll go ahead and press F2 for tool condition, and then F1 for thick. And then I want to press F1 for thick number. And then I just use the side arrow keys as to which condition I want to change. And then I press the up arrow key to turn that condition on. Now condition 2. Then I just press enter and then pause, and as you look at the condition, see that blinking light? That means the thick mode is turned on for that condition. After assigning the thick mode to a particular condition, every time you change that condition and press enter, you're going to get this menu that you see here, where it's asking you to set different parameters for the thick mode. First thing you want to notice is that it says mode 1. Now there's 2 modes to this, which I'll explain in just a second. The other values you want to pay attention to are the start and end points. The thick mode does what they call an overcut. In other words, where it starts and ends, it will actually overcut. It will start earlier than the point it's supposed to, and it will end after the point it's supposed to. This gives you nice clean cuts when you're dealing with stretchier materials such as sandblast. Like I said, there's two modes. If mode is set to 1, what it does is it performs the overcuts on the start and end using those values, plus the corners with acute angles. It'll also perform this overcut. It's slower, but you get nicer corners. Whereas mode 2 performs overcuts on the start and end points only. It's faster, but I would recommend it for thinner materials. For further information on this subject, please review the following pages of the FC2050 manual. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at our email address, which is tech.support@graphtechamerica.com, or call us at 888-318-3247.